The wind came first, hard and unkind, sweeping across the open trail like it had forgotten mercy. The sun had dropped an hour ago, and already the sky was turning the color of old bruises, purple fading into the blackness of a night without stars. A woman crouched low between two jagged rocks, her dress torn, her legs muddy, her hands pressed against her swollen belly. Delaney Grace. She did not cry. Not anymore. She had run out of tears sometime between the second contraction and the moment she realized no one was coming. No wagon. No rider. No father, no brother, no preacher with words of comfort. She had been cast out in the second trimester unholy, her husband's mother said, after he died from fever. No kin of ours bears bastard breath under our roof. The girl who used to sing in church now gave birth in dirt. Her dress, once pale blue, was soaked through with blood. She leaned back against the cold rock, teeth clenched, moaning low, like a dying deer that no longer feared being found. Her hands gripped a shredded petticoat she'd bunched up as cloth. The pain came in waves, breaking her open like a storm breaking trees. But it was the silence between the pain that scared her more. That silence whispered doubt. Whimpered questions. Would she survive? Would the child breathe? Would anyone care? A sharp cry tore through her throat as the final push came. She bore down with all that remained of her, and then the world tilted. Wet. Warm. Small. Slick. A newborn cry pierced the cold night like a flame in a dark church. Her baby. A girl. Alive. Delaney collapsed back against the stone, panting like she'd outrun death. Her fingers trembled as she reached for the child, pulled her close. The infant wailed, red-faced, slippery in blood and earth. Delaney held her against her chest and whispered, "Hush now, Mama's here." Her voice cracked. Her arms shook. But her heart, somehow, beat on. She had no knife to cut the cord, only a shard of flint she'd found near her boot. She made do. She always had. The wind howled again, colder this time, like it had been watching. The baby, too weak to nurse, whimpered with tiny gasps. Delaney clutched her tighter, wrapping her in her only shawl brown wool, frayed and damp. She pressed her lips to her daughter's forehead, tasting salt and iron and dust. There was no cradle. No name. Just the sound of her own heartbeat and the whistle of coyotes calling in the distance. For a while she sat like that, between stone and wind, between life and death. Her body burned with fever, her legs numb. She wondered if dying would feel like sleep or like being forgotten. She tried to pray, but the words felt dry. She whispered anyway. For strength. For morning. For milk. Her daughter's hand twitched against her chest, tiny as a sparrow's wing. Stay with me, she whispered. The baby's eyes stayed closed. Delaney leaned her head back and let the night wash over her. If this was the end, at least she had held her child. At least she hadn't died alone. But fate was not yet done with her. It came as a sound, barely there at first. The crunch of snow-softened gravel. A rhythm. A hoofbeat. She stirred, eyes narrowing toward the shadow that moved down the trail. It wasn't a wagon. Not a group. Just one figure on horseback, tall and still. The moon broke briefly through the clouds, casting silver on his shoulders. Apache. The thought flared in her mind. Every tale she'd heard back in Arkansas screamed at her, hide, run, pray. But she couldn't move. She was already on the ground, bleeding and broken and empty. Let him do what he would. But he did not reach for his rifle. Nor for her. The rider dismounted slowly, his movements calm, deliberate, like someone approaching a wounded animal. He stood over her now, towering and silent. Long black braids fell past his shoulders, tied with leather and beads. His skin was the warm tone of dusk. His eyes, amber, not cruel, took her in without speaking. Delaney swallowed hard, heart hammering against her chest. She raised her chin a little, as if to say, "Do what you must, but don't you dare see me as weak." The baby stirred and let out a soft whimper. The man's gaze flicked to the child, then to her face again. Then, slowly, he knelt. He reached inside his buffalo hide coat and withdrew a water skin. Wordlessly, he offered it. Delaney hesitated, her hand trembling as she took it. She drank. The cold water hit her dry throat like a mercy she didn't know how to receive. He did not speak. The man looked again at the infant, then pulled a soft pelt from his saddle pack, a mountain lion's fur, well-kept and warm. He held it out. Delaney watched him. Her lips parted, unsure. But when the wind howled again, she took the pelt and wrapped it around her child. Still silent, the man lifted his eyes to hers. And in that quiet look, she saw no judgment. No disgust. Only a question. "Will you come?" She didn't answer. She didn't nod. But when he reached down, she let him lift her. His arms were steady as stone, yet gentle. She leaned her cheek against his shoulder and felt herself begin to cry, not out of fear, but out of relief so deep it felt like breaking. He mounted with ease, holding her as one would a sacred thing. She clutched her child close. The man turned his horse, guiding it back the way he came. No words passed between them. The stars came out, finally. The trail ahead vanished into shadow and pine. Delaney didn't know where he was taking her. Whether he was friend or stranger. Whether this was salvation or something stranger still. But her child slept now, and she no longer shivered. And as the hooves beat steady against the frozen earth, she closed her eyes and whispered the only prayer she had left. "Let me live long enough to thank him." Because on that trail of stones and silence, she was supposed to die. But instead, a man who didn't speak her language wrapped her in fur, gave her water, and turned back toward warmth. And that was the beginning. Not the end. The horse moved like it knew the mountains by heart, each hoof placed with reverence, as though the stones themselves had once whispered their stories into its ears. The world was bone-cold now, dawn still curled in its dark blanket, and the man who rode did not speak. Delaney leaned her cheek against the fur on his chest, arms around her newborn, who lay silent in the warmth of the mountain lion pelt. The man's heart beat slow beneath her, steady as a drum carved from cedar, and every few moments, she closed her eyes to it, just to be sure it wasn't a dream. She had once heard a preacher say that salvation would come with trumpets. But for her, it had come with the soft tread of hooves and a stranger's silence. The trail curved through pinyon woods and then opened wide again, revealing a shallow creek, frozen in parts, trickling through a ravine. The man guided his horse through without pause. She didn't ask where they were going, couldn't have, even if she'd had the words. Her body still ached, hollowed out and raw from the birth. Her head swam with pain and too many sleepless nights. But more than that, she didn't want to break the spell. The quiet between them wasn't cold. It was sacred. She studied him as the horse climbed the next hill. He was massive, easily 6.5 feet tall, with shoulders broad as wagon beams. His back was straight, his posture composed like someone raised with deep discipline. He wore no badge, no blue coat, no spurs. Just leather, bone, and quiet strength. Braids rested against his chest, threaded with copper and feather. Every gesture was calm. Every decision unhurried. He had the presence of someone who didn't chase time, who understood it could be endured, like winter. She didn't know his name. But she trusted his silence more than she had ever trusted her father's sermons or her husband's vows. The child stirred, letting out a weak cry. Delaney shifted slightly, her arms tightening around her daughter's swaddled form. The man tilted his head slightly, not enough to look at her, just to listen. "She's okay," Delaney whispered, her voice little more than air. "Just hungry." He didn't reply, but she saw his fingers twitch slightly on the reins, then loosen again. It wasn't indifference, it was patience. As if he understood some things weren't his to fix, only to witness. A hawk shrieked high above them. Wind rustled through bare cottonwoods, and somewhere distant, a wolf howled once, then was still. Delaney's thoughts began to wander. She wondered if her baby would have a name. She hadn't chosen one yet. Back in the settlement, she'd hidden the pregnancy under aprons in silence. No one asked about the widow in the corner house. Not after her husband died. Not after the church stopped visiting. And when she showed the first signs, the sickness, the softness, they'd all known. They said the child was a punishment. A sin. They were wrong. She looked down at the baby's tiny fingers and whispered, "You're a beginning." They crested a final ridge, and there it was, a valley cupped between snow-frosted ridgelines. The man's cabin sat at the base of a slope, built from wide, hand-hewn logs, smoke rising from the chimney in a steady gray stream. A corral stood to the side, its gate broken. No other homes nearby. No footprints in the snow but his. He swung down first, then turned to lift her. His arms cradled her carefully, letting her keep the baby wrapped tight. She didn't flinch. Somehow, she knew she wouldn't fall. When he set her down on the porch, she swayed slightly from weakness. He steadied her with a hand beneath her elbow. That touch, simple, firm, carried more kindness than any scripture ever had. The cabin door opened with a low creak. Inside, the warmth hit her like light after storm, thick with wood smoke and old fur and something stewing in a blackened pot. A simple room, one large hearth, a bearskin on the floor. No cross, no Bible, no mirror. Just carved bowls, a few drying herbs, a pile of folded hides. He gestured to the pallet near the fire. She went. He knelt beside it, unrolled 2 furs, and pulled a sheepskin blanket over them. When she sat, her knees gave out, and she sank with a long, grateful exhale. Her back burned. Her hands were numb. Her child began to cry again, this time louder. She tried to nurse. Nothing came. The man knelt near the hearth and stirred the pot. After a moment, he stood, poured a ladle of warm goat's milk into a wooden cup, and came to her side. No ceremony. No questions. He handed her the milk. Then, slowly, tore a strip of hide, dipped it in, and showed her how to feed the baby drop by drop. The child suckled. Weak, but eager. Delaney broke. Her shoulders shook. Tears ran down her cheeks, silent and hot. The man didn't react. He rose, stepped outside, and came back with snow in a bowl. He set it beside the hearth to melt. It wasn't until she looked up again that she realized he had been watching the child, not her. He cared if the child lived. Something inside her began to shift. Something long buried. "Thank you," she said softly. He looked at her then. Really looked. His face still, unreadable, but his eyes carried something she hadn't seen in months, recognition. He didn't need to ask who she was. She was someone still alive. That night, she sat curled in the furs while he worked quietly near the fire. He tanned a hide, sharpened a small blade, and smoked a narrow pipe carved from antler. When the baby cried, he looked up. When she calmed, he returned to his rhythm. Delaney watched the shadows move along the walls. Outside, the wind howled again, but she no longer feared it. The storm had passed. Or maybe she'd just come in from it. Eventually, she whispered, "Delaney." His hands paused. He looked at her. "My name," she said. "Delaney Grace." A long moment passed. Then, in a voice low and sure, he said, "Tawa." The way he said it wasn't a boast. It wasn't a name meant to intimidate. It was just truth. A name spoken into firelight. She repeated it under her breath. Tawa. It suited him, like something carved by wind and earth. Like something older than anger, older than judgment. Later, as she drifted into sleep, her child at her side, she heard the sound of him tending the fire, then whispering words she didn't understand. A prayer, maybe. Or a song. She didn't ask. Some silences don't need breaking. And some names don't need to be written in books to be sacred. The fire was low but steady, burning the kind of wood that smelled faintly sweet when it cracked, juniper, maybe. Delaney watched its glow dance on the cabin walls, her baby nestled against her chest beneath the mountain lion pelt. She had not slept, not truly, but her body had stopped trembling, and that was something. Outside, snow drifted down in the hush of morning, blanketing the world with a stillness she could feel deep in her ribs. Tawa moved like he belonged to that silence. He knelt beside the hearth again, feeding the fire slowly. Every motion was deliberate, no wasted energy, no sudden noise. His shadow stretched long behind him, cast by the flicker of flame and early light filtering through the tiny window. He hadn't spoken since last night. She hadn't either. But the cabin didn't feel cold for it. Her daughter stirred and let out a weak cry, limbs flailing beneath the fur. Delaney adjusted her hold and tried again to feed her, and this time, thank God, her body responded. The baby latched on with a soft, greedy sound. Delaney gasped, relief and pain mingling sharp in her throat. Her eyes welled. It was working. She was working. She didn't realize she'd whispered, "Good girl," until Tawa looked over his shoulder. His gaze met hers, not long, not heavy, just enough. He nodded once. That small acknowledgement felt like a blessing. When the baby finished, Delaney laid her down beside her, swaddled and sleeping. She reached for a scrap of cloth and wiped herself clean, her hands clumsy from exhaustion. She could feel the soreness radiating from her hips, the bruised ache in her thighs. Her wrists ached. Her belly felt as if it had been carved hollow. But her child lived. And she was warm. That alone felt like a miracle. Tawa brought her a bowl of something thick, beans and squash and boiled meat. It smelled foreign, smoky, and earthy, but it was warm, and her hands closed around it like it might save her. She ate in slow spoonfuls, too tired to be embarrassed, too empty to pretend pride. When she finished, she said, "Thank you," softly. He took the bowl, rinsed it with melted snow, then set it back on the shelf. "You live here alone?" she asked. Tawa turned toward her, face still. "Yes." His voice was rough-edged but quiet. Like rocks under water. She nodded and leaned back against the wall, wincing. "How long?" He paused, then sat near the fire, stretching his legs out. 5 winters. Not married? He didn't answer at first. Then, no. She looked at the lines near his mouth, the scar down his left forearm. Not from war. From work. From living through things no one else saw. She tried not to pry. But the quiet invited questions. "You got family?" she asked after a long while. "Far." It was not said with sorrow. Just finality. Delaney rubbed her palm down her calf, watching the way the fire lit the length of his braids. He was younger than she'd first thought, not a grizzled elder, not a boy either. She guessed 30, maybe a little more. Younger than her late husband. Older than any man she'd ever dared speak freely to. "I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't found me." Tawa didn't respond. But she noticed the way his shoulders shifted, just slightly, as if receiving her gratitude quietly mattered to him. She looked around the cabin. Everything here was handcrafted. No table, but tools hung neatly on pegs. No mirror, but the inside of a polished shell rested on a shelf, reflecting the fire. No bed, only furs by the firelight. It wasn't just a home. It was a life someone had chosen, piece by piece, without the need to explain it. "I used to think a house needed a roof, 4 chairs, a clock on the wall," she murmured. "Turns out, I just needed someone who wasn't afraid to sit in silence with me." Tawa didn't smile. But his eyes softened. He stood, crossed the room, and fetched a shallow bowl carved from horn. He set it near the fire and added snow, then returned with a pouch of herbs, lavender, sage, and something unfamiliar. He steeped it slowly, stirring with a stick. The scent filled the room like memory. She asked, "What's that for?" "For you," he said. He brought the bowl to her. She dipped a cloth in the warm mixture, then wiped her face, her neck, the places no one had touched gently in years. The scent was calming, earthy and soft. She let her shoulders sag. "You don't have to take care of me," she whispered. "I know," he said. His voice was simple, almost apologetic. She looked down at her hands, dirt beneath her nails, blood still faint on her knuckles. "I wasn't supposed to survive," she said quietly. "They left me. I think they hoped I'd die." He said nothing. But he didn't look away.
My husband died 6 months after we married, she went on. Fever took him before we could even say the word baby out loud. His mama said I was cursed. That the baby came too soon. That I must have, she trailed off. Doesn't matter now. Tawa listened. Not like a man gathering facts, but like someone holding weight in his hands without flinching. Delaney swallowed hard. I thought if I just stayed quiet, just endured it, maybe God would see I was trying to be good. Her eyes filled. But I think I was really just hoping someone, anyone, would see me. The fire cracked, a slow soft sound. Tawa finally spoke. I saw you. And something broke loose in her chest. Not the kind of sob that wails. Not the kind that shakes the body. But a slow, silent weeping, shoulders rising and falling with no sound, tears slipping like prayers that had waited too long. Tawa didn't reach for her. Didn't offer comfort like a man trying to fix something. He just stayed. And the stillness between them grew warmer. The baby stirred again, and Delaney wiped her cheeks, reaching instinctively. Tawa rose and added another log to the fire. Does she have a name? He asked. She paused. Her fingers stroked the baby's downy hair. Not yet. He nodded once, then stepped outside to bring in more wood. Snow flurried past the open door like pale ash. When he returned, he stamped off his boots, then offered her a folded bundle, cloth, freshly laundered. For her, he said. Delaney took it, pressing the fabric to her face. It smelled faintly of smoke and cedar and wind. Thank you, she said again. This time her voice held steadiness. That night, she did not sleep, but she did rest. And as she lay on furs not meant to be a bed, beneath a roof built by one man's hands, with firelight dancing on walls older than any story she could tell, Delaney began to feel something foreign. Not comfort. Not safety. Not yet. But maybe the beginning of a kind of belonging she'd never known. One not offered in sermons, nor forged by rings. Just a place beside someone who stayed when others turned away. And that was more than enough. The snow had melted in soft patches by midweek, revealing dark earth beneath the drifts, and with it, the slow stirring of the world coming back to life. A few birds returned, quiet ones, gray and brown, hopping between tree limbs as if afraid to sing too early. The stream behind the cabin had thawed just enough to trickle again, and Delaney often stood beside it now, her baby pressed to her chest in a sling made from an old buckskin coat Tawa had cut and sewn with careful stitches. She was stronger. Not whole. But stronger. Her hips still ached when she bent to gather kindling. Her hands cracked in the cold and healed slowly. But each time her daughter cooed or grabbed her finger or fell asleep to the rhythm of her voice, she felt something inside her rebalance. They hadn't named the baby yet. Not properly. Tawa said names came when they were ready. She liked that. Let the child choose her name in her own time, with her own breath. Sometimes, Delaney sang. Not loudly. Not for show. Just small humming ballads, little threads of old songs from her girlhood. She sang while she swept, while she ground corn between two stones, while she bathed the baby with melted snow and steeped herbs. It was during one of these quiet songs, voice low and breathy like a lullaby whispered to the sky, that she saw him watching. Tawa stood by the window, arms crossed over his chest, head tilted slightly. Not intruding. Not evaluating. Just listening. And something about the way he looked at her, like the sound meant something, like it carried weight, made her throat tighten. No man had ever watched her sing without trying to make it about himself. But Tawa stood as if her voice was a thing worthy of stillness. She didn't stop singing. She just closed her eyes for a moment and let herself believe she was safe. The quiet between them grew fuller that week. Not heavier, fuller. Tawa began to leave her alone in the mornings, riding out before sunrise and returning around midday with meat slung across his saddle or roots bundled in birch bark. He never said where he went, and she never asked. But she noticed the way his shoulders relaxed slightly when he stepped back through the door, saw her there, baby on her hip. As though part of him had worried she wouldn't be. On the 7th morning, something changed. It came with the sound of hooves, multiple. Too many for comfort. Tawa heard them first.
He paused, turned his head, and walked to the doorway, standing in the frame like a shadow made of stillness. Delaney froze where she stood by the hearth, heart rising into her throat. Then came the voice, a drawl she hadn't heard in months.
Well, I'll be damned. Ain't that little Delaney Grace?
She turned slowly. 3 riders had come into the clearing. All settlers.
All armed. One wore a preacher's collar crooked around his neck.
Another, red-faced and thick-bellied, carried a shotgun low but ready. And in front of them all, smirking beneath a slouched hat, was Elias Wren. Her cousin by marriage. Her judge and jury.
What are you doing out here with an Injun? Elias said, swinging down from his horse and spitting into the snow. He got you working for him? Or are you his wife now? Tawa didn't move. Delaney stepped forward, baby wrapped tight to her chest. You shouldn't be here. Elias laughed.
I should be wherever I please.
This land's still settler land.
Not red man's. The preacher cleared his throat. We came with concern, Miss Grace.
Folks in town been talkin'. Said they seen you out here, said you might not be fit to raise a child. Delaney felt her knees go hollow.
I am fit, she said.
You gave birth in a ditch, Elias snapped.
You left the Lord's care.
You're shacked up with a savage. That baby don't stand a chance. Tawa stepped forward once. Just once. No weapon drawn. No words spoken.
But it was enough to make the man with the shotgun raise it.
I wouldn't, Delaney said quickly. The baby stirred. Delaney's arms tightened.
She's safe here, she said. And she is mine.
She's illegitimate, Elias said. You're a woman unwed, underfed, and unwell.
You got no claim to a child.
Delaney's voice shook. You're not the law.
No, the preacher said.
But the town council's a skin for a formal review. We'll be back.
They left with the sound of fake apologies and thin threats trailing behind them like smoke. When the hoofbeats finally faded, she collapsed against the cabin wall, shaking.
Tawa walked to her but didn't touch her.
They'll come back, she said.
Yes.
They want to take her.
Yes. She looked up at him, eyes red. Will you stop them?
His eyes met hers.
If they try. But if they bring the law, bring more men?
He paused. Then we don't wait here.
Delaney blinked. Run? He nodded.
She looked down at her baby, asleep against her breast. A child born in dirt, wrapped in fur, now hunted not because of anything she'd done, but because her mother had dared survive.
Delaney exhaled slowly.
That evening, she bathed the child in a warmed bowl, sang an old hymn under her breath, and dressed her in the soft cloth Tawa had given them. She turned toward him after the baby was asleep and said, "They think I'm unfit because I'm not married."
Tawa didn't answer.
He only sat by the fire, sharpening a long, curved blade. She hesitated. Then said, "I'd rather be alone than belong to a man who sees me as less."
He looked up. You are not less. A pause. You sing like the land remembers you. Delaney swallowed the knot in her throat.
They'll come back, she said again.
He nodded. Let them.
And for the first time since the child was born, Delaney didn't feel like running.
Because someone finally was staying.
It began with smoke on the horizon, dark and winding like a question asked too many times.
Tawa saw it first, standing outside the cabin just after sunrise, snow-soft beneath his boots.
He watched the curling trail rise from the pines down toward the settlement, not from a chimney but from many bunched together, clustered in a way that meant only one thing. The town was waking. And it wasn't waking kindly. Inside, Delaney was swaddling her daughter, now 3 weeks old and thriving, pink-cheeked and curious. The girl cooed when the morning light touched her face, small fingers reaching out like she wanted to hold the world.
Delaney smiled gently, tracing a line along the baby's forehead.
That child had become her compass, her breath, the proof that something beautiful could survive ruin. She looked up as Tawa stepped through the doorway. "They're coming," he said simply. She nodded. There was no need to ask who. They had known this was coming. Since Elias and his men rode off muttering threats and scripture like they were bullets, the air had changed. Tawa had prepared. He'd sharpened every tool, cleaned every fur, and packed a small pouch with dried meat, herbs, and flint. Delaney had readied what she could: bottled milk, extra cloth, a sling for the child. But now, faced with the truth of it, her knees still trembled. Tawa moved to her side, gaze level, voice calm. "If we leave now, we have time to reach the river canyon." She looked down at her daughter. Then out the window toward the distant line of smoke. And then she shook her head. "I'm tired of running," she said. Tawa watched her for a long breath. "Then we stay." Not with rage. Not with pride. Just the quiet resolve of someone who has faced too many storms to fear another. She packed the rest of the supplies anyway, just in case. But when the time came, she didn't move toward the door. She stood in the center of that small cabin, firelight on her face, daughter in her arms, and waited. They heard the wagons before they saw them. Creaking wheels. The clatter of hooves. A distant murmur of voices, dozens of them. Then the first man crested the hill, then the second, and by the time the full crowd came into view, Delaney's breath caught. The entire town. Men with rifles slung over shoulders. Women in stiff corsets and judgment-laced stares. Children watching from wagon benches, their eyes wide and confused. The sheriff rode at the front, a long-barreled shotgun across his lap. Elias sat just behind him, chin high, confidence puffed up like he'd already won something. Delaney stepped out onto the porch, baby held close. Tawa stood beside her, unmoving. The sheriff raised a hand. The crowd stopped. "We're here for the child," he called. Delaney's heart slammed in her chest. "She's mine." Elias leaned forward in his saddle. "You forfeited that claim when you chose the savage over your own people." Tawa took a step forward. "Back," the sheriff warned. "This ain't about race. It's about what's right. That child deserves a proper home." Delaney laughed then, not out of humor, but disbelief. Her voice cracked with it. "Proper? From the town that left me to die in the snow?" The sheriff didn't answer. "I bled alone. Prayed alone. Fed her from a body that hadn't eaten in days. He found me. He carried me. Not one of you came looking." Elias snapped. "He seduced you. Made you think you had no other choice." "He didn't seduce me," she said. "He saved me." The baby began to cry. She shifted, rocking her gently. Elias dismounted. "Enough. Bring her forward." The sheriff raised his hand. Tawa moved before they could blink. He was off the porch and across the snow in seconds, standing between Delaney and the crowd, tall and still, like the trees themselves had sent a sentinel. "She stays," he said. "You threatening the law?" the sheriff asked. "No," Tawa said, and gently unsheathed the blade from his belt. "But I won't kneel to it." The moment cracked. The preacher gasped. A woman in the crowd cried out. Two men raised rifles. Delaney stepped off the porch, heart pounding. "No," she said. "Stop." Tawa didn't move. His stance was protective, not aggressive, but no one doubted he could end 3 men before a bullet ever reached him. She stepped in front of him. "She stays with me," she said again. "But not because of him. Because of me. I'm not unfit. I'm not unworthy. I'm a mother. And that should be enough." The sheriff studied her. "And if it's not?" Delaney looked at the crowd. "Then do what you came to do." The silence that followed was thick. A decision waited there, hanging in the cold morning air. And then something shifted. A voice rang out from the back of the crowd. A woman. Older.
wrinkled hands holding the hand of a child.
I saw her sing, the woman said. When no one thought she'd survive. I saw her hold that baby like she was stitched to her heart.
Another voice followed. I brought her food once. She shared it.
I saw her at the creek. She spoke to her child like a mother, not a sinner.
The tide was turning. Delaney blinked, unsure if she was dreaming. Then Elias spat. You're all fools. She's a whore who laid down with an animal. He didn't finish. Tawa moved so fast the snow barely stirred.
He grabbed Elias by the coat, lifted him with one hand, and slammed him into the wagon post. The rifles rose again, but the sheriff didn't move. Tawa's voice came low, level, and deadly. She gave life while you gave stones.
Elias, red-faced and sputtering, couldn't answer. Tawa dropped him. The sheriff stood. Looked at Delaney. Then the child. Then at the crowd. He lowered his rifle. She stays, he said. The tension broke like glass. Elias roared, but no one followed.
The crowd began to turn, one by one, like a wind losing strength. Delaney stood frozen, tears on her cheeks. She looked at Tawa. He met her gaze and nodded once, as if to say, it's done. But she knew it wasn't done.
Not fully. Not ever. The whispers would follow them. The looks. The wariness. But something had shifted. Something had held.
That night, after the crowd had vanished back into the trees, after the baby was asleep and the fire crackled steady, Delaney sat beside Tawa on the fur. She reached out, her fingers brushing his wrist. Slowly, she turned his hand over, placed hers in it.
You didn't ask me to stay, she whispered. Tawa looked at her, eyes soft as the snow outside. I didn't want you to feel owned. She smiled. You didn't make me feel owned. You made me feel seen. Silence again. Then, I want to stay. He didn't respond at first.
Then he turned his palm and laced his fingers with hers. No more running, she said.
No, he agreed. We build here.
They sat that way for a while, two quiet souls with wounds still healing, a fire warming their shadows. Outside, the wind sang low through the pines. Inside, their daughter shifted in her sleep and smiled. And in that moment, something sacred settled.
Not loud. Not grand. Just a quiet kind of forever.
Because the town had gathered. But he had carried her through. And in doing so, he'd taught her the only kind of love that ever mattered.
The kind that stays.